Smart enough. In Melbourne town, where the suits all grind, there's a lawyer with a vision, one of a kind. He's the Aussie overlawd. He'll fight for your rights, and he's got his own channel shining bright. From the courtroom to the web, he's got it all, sharing legal knowledge, answering the call. He breaks it down in a language we all understand. The Aussie overlawd taking a stand. With his Aussie charm and his legal know-how, he's the hero we need, showing us how. He fights for justice, no case too tough. The Aussie overlawd, he's more than enough. He's more than enough. In Melbourne town, where the suits all grind, there's a lawyer with a vision, one of a kind. He's the Aussie overlawd. He'll fight for your rights, and he's got his own channel shining bright. From the courtroom to the web, he's got it all, sharing legal knowledge, answering the call. He breaks it down in a language we all understand. The Aussie overlawd taking a stand. With his Aussie charm and his legal know-how, he's the hero we need, showing us how. He fights for justice, no case too tough. The Aussie overlawd, he's more than enough. He's more than enough. In Melbourne town, where the suits all grind, there's a lawyer with a vision, one of a kind. He's the Aussie overlawd. He'll fight for your rights, and he's got his own channel shining bright. From the courtroom to the web, he's got it all, sharing legal knowledge, answering the call. He breaks it down in a language we all understand. The Aussie overlawd taking a stand. With his Aussie charm and his legal know-how, he's the hero we need, showing us how. He fights for justice, no case too tough. The Aussie overlawd, he's more than enough. He's more than enough. In Melbourne town, where the suits all grind, there's a lawyer with a vision, one of a kind. He's the Aussie overlawd. He'll fight for your rights, and he's got his own channel shining bright. From the courtroom to the web, he's got it all, sharing legal knowledge, answering the call. He breaks it down in a language we all understand. The Aussie overlawd taking a stand. With his Aussie charm and his legal know-how, he's the hero we need, showing us how. He fights for justice, no case too tough. The Aussie want enough. In Melbourne town, where the suits all grind, there's a lawyer with a vision, one of a kind. He's the Aussie overlawd. He'll fight for your rights, and he's got his own channel shining bright. From the courtroom to the web, he's got it all, sharing legal knowledge, answering the call. He breaks it down in a language we all understand. The Aussie overlawd taking a stand. With his Aussie charm and his legal know-how, he's a hero.
Testing. Yep, think that's all up and running. Yep, good. He was one of Australia's most prolific hackers. At a young age, not only had he managed to hack into things like the Department of Defense in the US and NASA, he was pretty instrumental in certain war activities, as you may or may not know. But what seems to have come completely out of left field is that Julian Assange has entered into a plea deal in order to be released after 1,901 days of effective detention, be it behind bars in Belmarsh Prison or in the Ecuadorian embassy until he was dragged out by his feet. Shocked, not gonna lie, but we'll have to see exactly where that manages to go. Because the simple fact of the matter is, I was one of those people that was positive that if he ever set foot on a plane outside of the UK, we would never see the man alive again. But as it turns out, he's arrived. He pled guilty to a single count under the Espionage Act in a US territory so that he didn't have to touch ground on continental USA, which, to be frank, I don't blame him. But what we're going to do is we're going to run through some of the history of the man, and then we're going to run through exactly what's transpired. Now, of course, as it is federal, we didn't get the actual the hearing itself to be live streamed. I'm going to be using the Australian ABC's coverage of it because they did live tweet various bits and pieces, and we've got some interviews with politicians which really irritated me because, of course, every political peacock out there is preening at the moment because, oh, I had something to do with him getting released. Yeah, I'd say the fact that the Albanese government's sitting there going, oh, we were instrumental in his release. Yeah, sure, if that's what you're going to portray to the public, go for it. But not only do I not believe you, I'm more than willing to bet that I know the actual reason why you're taking credit for it. But anyway, let's get stuck into it. Welcome to today's episode of Law News and Laughter. Okay, starting with key dates in the WikiLeaks founder case. Because this has been going on for, over a decade now. I distinctly remember sitting in my criminal procedure law class at law school discussing this case. Back when the Swedish allegations came out, and for some reason we decided it'd be a good idea and a good use of class resources to sit down and translate out the charge sheet against him and work out exactly why we thought it was bullshit. But All right, Julian Assange is to make his final bid for appeal. Oh, yes, keep in mind, this particular article was like 4 months ago, but it's a very good update thing and they've also updated it to the current issues as well. The WikiLeaks founder is wanted in the US over an alleged conspiracy to obtain and disclose national defense information after the publication of hundreds of thousands of leaked documents related to the Afghanistan and Iraq wars. Now, keep in mind, people, I'm heavily biased in relation to this situation. I'll be perfectly honest about that. This is one where I'm quite passionate about it because the simple fact of the matter is what he disclosed is either appropriate under the rules of engagement and therefore should not have been an issue to be disclosed, or it was evidence of a governmental crime and they spent 10 years pursuing him in order to cover it up. So, either way, doesn't really look good. So, on 31st of August 2010, Swedish police questioned Assange about 2 separate allegations, one of rape and one of inappropriate touching, which he denied. The international arrest warrant is issued so Assange can be questioned on suspicion of rape and unlawful coercion. As I said, going through those particular things, claiming that you revoked consent after the fact is a whole nother kettle of fish and a whole nother argument to be had. The simple fact of the matter was that the timing was way too convenient for those charges, because all of a sudden a country where there would be a direct extradition to the US kind of came out a little bit too conveniently for my and many others' opinions. On 7th of December, he presented himself to police in London and was remanded into custody after hearing. He was later granted conditional bail at the High Court, bankrolled by supporters who paid £240,000. On 2nd of November 2011, he lost an appeal to extradite him to Sweden. A judge denied that it would violate his human rights. He continued to appeal, and in June 2012, he entered the Ecuadorian embassy in London, requesting political asylum. Scotland Yard confirmed that he was subject to the arrest for breaching his bail conditions. He was granted political asylum in August, and he emerged on the Ecuadorian embassy's balcony and called for the US government to renounce its witch hunt against WikiLeaks. He again appears at the door to say the door is open for talks to avoid extradition to Sweden in December. June 2013, he told journalists that he would not leave the embassy even if the charges against him were dropped due to fears that he'd be extradited to the US. Let's keep in mind, this man released, half a million classified documents with the help of Chelsea Manning, which, by the way, bang up job to certain news outlets, because way to do your research and forget that Chelsea Manning's a dude. There are a bunch of people who are going, oh, well, she did this and she did... In today's current climate, do you really want to be misgendering someone, especially someone prolific as that? Top secret clearance side of me is upset about leaks, period, but the government wrongdoing also offsets those concerns. Similar to mind blanking, but guy is now in Russia. The essay was way too convenient. It's basically the world's oldest crime to accuse someone of. In July of 2014, a judge in Stockholm upholds the arrest warrant against him for alleged misconduct against 2 women, and he later loses an appeal. In 2015, prosecutors asked to question him inside the embassy. Investigations into the allegations are dropped due to time restrictions. The investigation into the suspected rape remained active as at August 2015. The UK Foreign Office Minister Hugo Swire said that Ecuador's decision to harbour Assange in its embassy had prevented the proper course of justice. He restated the UK's legal obligation to extradite him to Sweden. October 2015, the Metropolitan Police ended their 3-year-long 24-hour guard outside the embassy. It's estimated to have cost more than $12 million. Sorry, £12 million. £12 million of the UK taxpayer money wasted standing outside a embassy in order to make sure that the guy gets extradited. Chelsea Manning pretends to be a woman to distractedly align with the movement. No. In February 2016, the UN working on an arbitrary detention says that Assange is being arbitrarily detained and calls on authorities to end his deprivation of liberty. The following month, the UK government asked for a review, saying the opinion was deeply flawed, but is later rejected. In June, Ecuador revealed that the Swedish authorities had officially requested to interview Assange. He filed an appeal in the Swedish court, arguing the country must comply with the UN working group's findings. In November, he's questioned over the remaining allegation at the Ecuadorian embassy by Swedish authorities in a 2-day interview. In January 2017, Barack Obama's decision to free the whistleblower Chelsea Manning prompts speculation that Assange will end his self-imposed exile. Let's keep in mind, the US citizen that was involved in this was freed. Yeah, well, Snowden's a whole nother kettle of fish. In January, 2 days later, Assange told a press conference that he stands by his offer to go to the US provided his rights are respected. The former UKIP leader Nigel Farage is spotted leaving the embassy. The then US Attorney General Jeff Sessions says Assange's arrest is a priority for the US. Keep in mind, this is 7 years after this has already taken place. Swedish authorities suddenly dropped the investigation into the allegations of rape. The UK Foreign Office turns down a request from the Ecuadorian government to grant Assange diplomatic status. Ecuador confirms it granted citizenship to Assange in December at his request, and the Westminster Magistrates Court upholds the arrest warrant for skipping bail. The judge orders him to show the courage to appear in court. The Ecuadorian embassy suspends his internet access, complaining interfered with other states' affairs. Yeah, probably shouldn't have actually been talking on the internet about various things and, like, engaging in crap, especially when you're in political asylum. In August, the US Senate committee asked to interview Assange as part of his investigation into the alleged Russian interference in the 2016 presidential election. Yeah, they just happened to throw that one out there too. Because keep in mind, people, there's more than one comment out there where Hillary has said that Pizzagate cost her the election. That's part of the reason why I was pretty sure that if he ever set foot on a plane, the man would never be seen or heard from again. In October, Assange does something stupid and accuses Ecuador of violating his fundamental rights and freedoms because they wouldn't allow him internet access. Yeah, because it's a great idea to, take a shot at the place that's giving you political asylum when you've got an arrest warrant out for espionage charges. In November, the Department of Justice inadvertently names Assange in a court document suggesting that he may have been charged in secret. In January 2019, lawyers for Assange say that they're taking action aimed at making President Donald Trump's administration reveal secretly filed charges. There's conflicting reports over whether he has been expelled from the embassy in April, and Assange is arrested at the embassy in London after his diplomatic status is revoked 6 days later. Assange was sentenced to 50 weeks imprisonment by Southwark Crown Court. That was for skipping out on the bail. He continues to be held on remand in Belmarsh from September after serving the custodial sentence. Swedish authorities conveniently, despite saying that, there's... You're a hacker, sir. No Wi-Fi for you. Clinton fatigue and body count may have been a bigger concern. Just a little bit. On the 19th of May, the Swedish authorities resumed their investigation. Nice and convenient there. And then 6 months later, in November, they've dropped it for lack of ability to prosecute. Shocker. February 2020, Assange faces extradition at Woolwich Crown Court, where his representatives argue that he cannot legally be handed to the US for political offences because of the 2003 extradition treaty. Assange appeared via video link at Westminster Magistrates Court, where he refused bail. Refused bail amid the coronavirus issues. The US Department of Justice in June issued an updated 18-count indictment over Assange's alleged role in one of the largest compromises of classified information in the history of the United States. Assange's extradition hearing resumed at the Old Bailey on 7th of September. In January 22, a judge at the Old Bailey rules that Assange cannot be extradited to the US. He was refused bail at the US government's appeal against as the US government appealed against the decision to block his extradition. In August that year, the government is allowed by the High Court to expand the basis of its appeal against the judge's decision not to extradite Assange. Keep in mind at this point, in various ways, shapes, or forms, he'd been detained by this stage for 11 years. And I do class his time in the Ecuadorian embassy as detainment because he was not free to move about. I don't get the feeling they're protecting him. Well, we won't know until he actually hits the ground. Truly thought this day would never come. So did I, honestly. I legitimately thought that he would just quietly disappear. In December, the US government wins its High Court appeal to overturn the judge's decision not to extradite Assange. His lawyers start the process towards a Supreme Court appeal over his extradition in the US. In 2022, he won the first stage of his Supreme Court appeal bid against the decision not to allow his extradition to the US. He's denied permission to appeal against the High Court's decision in December 21. Assange married Stella Morris at Belmarsh Prison in a private ceremony lasting around 3 hours, with 6 guests, including the couple's 2 young sons and Assange's father. In April, Westminster Magistrates Court formally issues an extradition order, meaning that the then Home Secretary is responsible for deciding whether or not to approve the extradition, with 2 months to make her decision. In June, she signed the order, literally with 3 days to go. He's free on a plea deal. Doesn't that mean that he will admit guilt? We will get to that, Wardrobe, but yes, pretty much he has pled guilty in the US federal court. I saw that certain individuals in the US have already been served with documents, and people are pushing for a presidential pardon, which I would say is fairly unlikely. I know this is the boring bit, people. We will get through it, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of things. Where are we? In August, his legal team lodged a perfected grounds of appeal before the High Court, challenging the district judge's decision of 4th of January with new evidence. In June 2023, his application to appeal is refused by Justice Swift, stating that none of the 4 grounds of appeal raises any probable arguable point. In a separate ruling, the High Court judge also denied his permission to appeal a ruling by District Judge Vanessa Barrister in January of 2021. In June, Assange's team lodged a renewed appeal with the High Court. Assange's team confirmed in December that the next appeal will take place in February of 2024. Now, I'd like to clarify, because you'll notice that in amongst all of that, exactly where do you see anything about the Australian government trying to intervene? And that's why I'm really freaking irritated this morning, because, as I said, the peacocks are out there preening themselves saying, oh, we were quietly using, quiet negotiations and quiet jurisdiction and quiet whatever else. Bullshit. What you did was raise it with the US government as a political sticking point and reason that you may not get re-elected. You can't tell me you were pushing for his release, because what you were doing was pushing for a resolution of the case. That's not the same thing. Pushing it that it goes either way allows you to lie through your teeth and saying, yes, we were quietly trying to make sure that this political issue, this political hot potato, was resolved. Well, good on you. Then trying to take credit for him being released, I think, is a bit of a stretch, frankly. I mean, in 2022, when his barrister was addressing the Australian National Press Club, Jennifer Robinson was talking about how, didn't Barnaby have a bit of a go in last year in the US? Yeah, but he didn't have any real power to do so. And that's why it was really frustrating for me. Jennifer Robinson, when she spoke, Assange's lawyer in the UK, was talking about how, I don't know, they'd exhausted almost every legal avenue and that it was now a political issue. And she was basically appealing to the public to try and push the government to do something. And as you'll see when we deep dive into certain documents that were released about Australia's position on it, the Australian government wasn't going to do shit until he'd already arrived in the US and he was allegedly already in jail, and then they were going to be pushing for his release, as opposed to intervening and saying, yeah, this just needs to end. He needs to be returned to Australia. Oh no, they wanted him to serve time in the US. That's an official policy that was released in various documents. And we're going to look at that. Pretty much silence throughout the whole journey? Yeah. In 2014, in February, Seller Assange told reporters that if he lost his bid, he would apply to the European Court of Human Rights for a Rule 39 order to stop the extradition as well as a full application. Assange's appeal hearing began at the Royal Courts in February. Now, so what's the absolute latest? Well, here we go. This was as of 6 a.m. my time yesterday. This morning. Yesterday, news broke that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange was set to be freed after agreeing to a plea deal with US prosecutors, bringing a sudden end to his long-running legal saga and delighting his relatives and supporters. Some of his supporters. Assange's plane was set to land in Saipan Here's a summary of what we know. The WikiLeaks founder was freed from London's high-security Belmarsh prison on Tuesday after 1,901 days behind bars and quickly departed the United Kingdom, accompanied by Australia's High Commissioner to the UK, Stephen Smith. And I might add, I got to give him fair call here. That is also former Prime Minister, so basically our former President, Kevin Rudd, who is currently ambassador to the US. I kind of feel like he was on that plane more as a nanny than anything else, but didn't realize he was in prison either. Yeah. They basically held him in Belmarsh prison from the moment that he finished serving the time for the bail breach, because there's been arguments over his extradition for however long. So in order to make sure that he was available and didn't run to another consulate, they put him in Belmarsh prison for an extended period of time. The entire time. And I should note that the original idea was for him to be taken to continental United States. He had to pay for a private jet to be chartered at a cost of $500,000 US, roughly $728,000 Australian, in order for him to go to Saipan and go to the court there, because presumably he had to pay for US Marshals to be present. He had to pay for the Australian diplomats to be on the plane. He had to you smell a Biden, right? The exact cost of it, and funnily enough, he's had to go into debt for it as well. So they've opened a GoFundMe in order to pay for all of that so that he could take a fairly conservative approach to protecting himself. The flight landed in Bangkok to refuel on Tuesday afternoon. He was scheduled to appear in the federal court in the Northern Mariana Islands, a United States Commonwealth in the Western Pacific, at 9 a.m. on Wednesday to plead guilty to a single espionage act of conspiring to unlawfully obtain and disseminate classified national defense information. His brother said to the Sydney Morning Herald the family were overjoyed that he'd be landing in Australia, as he was expected to travel to Canberra after pleading guilty in Saipan. The plea deal follows determined lobbying by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Notice how they're already starting to puff up and say, yes, this is a direct result of what the government's been doing. Fuck you. Oh, I just realized that I hadn't reset the counter. Bankrupt your enemies? Yeah, seems to be a recurring ploy, shall we say. Who raised Assange's case in meetings with US President Joe Biden and Australian politicians from across the political spectrum. I call bullshit. Where are we? The plane landed in Saipan. In a post by WikiLeaks, VistaJet flight VJT199 was listed as a charter flight carrying Assange. Flight tracking link from FlightAware showed that the plane landed about 5 minutes landed at 6:16 a.m. in Saipan. Sun's about to rise on Saipan Island, the US territory where Julian Assange's plane is due to land. Well, he landed. We know that much. The release of the WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has sparked condemnation and celebration across the US, reflecting the ongoing divisions of his role in publishing classified military and diplomatic documents. And despite US President Joe Biden being lobbied for months to drop the proceedings against Assange, the White House says it played no role in his new plea deal, which will allow the Australian to be freed after he pleads guilty to a single felony charge under the Espionage Act. This was an independent decision made by the Department of Justice, and there's no White House involvement in the plea deal decision. You know what that does? That completely blows out of the water any argument that Albanese was involved. Because Albanese claims that he was speaking directly with Joe Biden and the administration in order to get him freed. And yet the US administration is saying that they had no involvement in it. Yeah. Joe doesn't even know who this guy is. Joe doesn't know who Joe is. He doesn't have any sort of sensory apparatus known to man. As news of Assange's expected release reverberated across the US, some lashed out at the development and compared it to Donald Trump's looming trial for handing over classified documents, while others praised the deal as long overdue. Former Republican Vice President Mike Pence said the plea deal was a miscarriage of justice and dishonors the service and sacrifice of men and women of our armed forces and their families. Suck a dick. Hang on. We'll go back to the US thing in a minute. The charter flight cost, $780,000. Stella Assange said that Reuters told Reuters that a fundraising why is my words not working this morning? A fundraising campaign will be launched for Julian as the flight from London to Saipan will cost $520,000 US. Family will also seek a pardon for Julian after he agreed to plead guilty to violating US espionage law. Stella, who is a lawyer, has worked on Julian's campaign since the start of his legal battles. She said that she would seek a pardon because the acceptance of guilt was a very serious concern for journalists around the world. Says crap like that, and in the next breath says he stands for the First Amendment. Pretty sure Biden still has a sense of smell. The fact there's a guilty plea under the Espionage Act in relation to obtaining, disclosing national defense information is obviously a very serious concern for journalists and national security journalists in general. It's an Australian policy that he will have to pay for his own return flight, so he's had to charter a flight, and so he will basically be in debt when he lands in Canberra. We're going to launch an emergency fund to try and get this money so we can pay the Australian government back for its freedom flight. Sounds like intimidation and duress. A little bit, yeah. And this is where it starts to get really irritating for me, because this is when Kevin Rudd decided to stick his nose in. And look, I used to be a Rudd supporter. The man gave me money back in like 2008, 2009. I'm not going to deny that. But he's basically been a whipping boy for the US ever since. And like, don't get me wrong, I love the US. Not necessarily the US administration, though. Former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, now the Australian ambassador to the United States, is to be heading to the Pacific island of Saipan to attend the court hearing that will decide whether Julian Assange can return to Australia. Comes up after years of diplomatic work in Washington to arrange a plea deal that's acceptable to the United States government, as well as the WikiLeaks founder. Rudd's likely to join the Australian High Commissioner to the UK, Stephen Smith, in the high-powered diplomatic contingent to observe the court hearings, which will decide whether or not to accept the felony plea. Oh, bite me. Saipan's in the same time zone as Eastern Australian states. All sides expect the court decision to allow Assange to leave Saipan for Australia soon after the appearance. Before the US judge, nothing is certain until the judicial process is completed. Rudd and Smith were cabinet colleagues during the Labor government from 2007 to 2013, with Smith serving as the foreign minister with Rudd as prime minister. The charter flight taking Assange to Saipan landed at the airport at 6:16, according to flight radar websites. I did love that we had the head of Russia's media network praising Assange because, never let something go to waste. I hope he got first class for that price. Well, I mean, it was literally a chartered jet. So, yes, I would think that would be classed as first class, frankly. And then you got the defense minister, Richard Marles. This guy... pretty much every politician under the sun gave some form of interview this morning about it, because everyone wants to be attached to this for some reason or another. Either they're condemning it, or they're praising it, or whatever else. Miles declined to give further details about the release was negotiated with the United States, but he said he would not describe it as a sore point for US and Australian relations. I've been working with the US since we've come to power on a range of issues, and I certainly couldn't see this being a big issue. You want to bet? Albanese said in February that this was a sticking point and a sore issue with the US, and they were calling for it to be resolved one way or another. There was a parliamentary motion that was put forward by an independent, I might add. Oh, hang on. Is Andrew Wilkie independent? I meant to double check that before I went live. Because, don't want to accidentally defame anybody. They kept it zip for years, now they'll have something to say. Exactly. Hang on. Wilkie Assange motion. I want to make sure I get that right. No, it was an independent that pushed for it. The independent member for Clark, Andrew Wilkie, successfully moved for motion, calling on the House representatives to recognise the importance of bringing Julian Assange's extradition to an end and allowing him to return home. So literally, an independent third party was the one that brought it forward, but everyone decided to jump on it. Watch, Hillary will cry, she's trying to get him somehow. Was Pamela Anderson on the plane to help him celebrate his freedom? No, but apparently his wife was, which is the main thing. Where are we? So that was the plane landing in Saipan. think this was the... Which one was this? There was one... Where's the video gone? Come on. It's going to be a pain in the backside now. Do not board a Boeing plane between Guam and Australia. Oh, it's because it's still live. That's the problem. Further live coverage is expected. That's funny. Okay, doesn't matter. That's Assange on the plane. Plane landing. Assange getting out. Kevin Rudd and Assange arriving at the courthouse. Former US President Mike Pence says WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's plea deal is a miscarriage of justice. In a post on X, he said Assange endangered the lives of troops in the time of war and should have been prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. You really want to talk about people being prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law? They'll do a switcheroo with the plane to Australia. God, I hope not. But like I said, I legitimately thought this guy was going to just disappear. I honestly thought that if there was a direct extradition to the United States, he was never going to be seen again. It may still happen, frankly. There's still he's not due to arrive in Australia for another 7 hours. That's a lot of time for a CIA hit to take place, just saying. The Biden administration's plea deal with Assange is a miscarriage of justice and dishonors the service and sacrifice of the men and women of our armed forces and their families. Wasn't all this during the Obama administration? Like, tell me if I'm wrong here, people. I wasn't paying attention to US politics at that stage, but I kind of feel like if things were done illegally, like, there's a layover in Singapore. Always a 3-letter agency just around the corner, Australia or not. Oh, I'm well aware of that. And in our case, it's a 4-letter agency. But that's why I'm being particularly careful with certain things that I'm saying today. Unfortunately. I'm not going to lie about that. Australian politicians from across the political spectrum of this morning giving their views on WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange's pending freedom. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill said it's an enormously important day for Assange, which the government welcomes. And yet you'll lie through your teeth and say that you had everything to do with it. An entire plane is still missing in the ocean over on that side of the world. That is true too. Whatever you may think about Julian Assange, this is a person who's been subject to a 14-year standoff and a very difficult issue for the people involved in this, as we do want to see the matter brought to a close, she said to 7 Sunrise. I want Australians to know how instrumental our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has been in making this happen. Despite the fact that the US government's saying that the government had no intervention whatsoever, Albanese was instrumental in making this happen. Wah, wah, wah. He was the biggest proponent of resolving this human rights matter long before it became popular opinion. Bullshit. Coalition Finance spokesperson Jane Hume also backed the legal saga coming to an end, but said that Assange was no hero. Personally speaking, Julian Assange is no hero of mine. He put lives in danger, not just of counterintelligence agencies in the US, but also the innocent, helpful Iraqi and Afghani citizens who were helping coalition forces. That was a reckless move. If it hadn't been covered up, wouldn't have been necessary. Might just send him to us. No one will ever find him. Look, possibly. Hopefully switched airplanes or is on a yacht somewhere. The Greens have said from the beginning that journalism is not a crime and it's caused many people around the country incredible distress to watch how Julian Assange has been treated, according to Adam Bant. I hate when I have to start agreeing with people like the Greens. Like, that's disturbing to me. 9:14 a.m., just past 9 a.m. in Saipan, and the plea hearing had begun. Assange will be sentenced for time served in the court. An updated court document states that Assange has been summoned to the 3rd floor of the district court. One count listed conspiring to unlawfully obtain and disseminate classified information relating to national defense of the United States in violation of Title 18, Section 793G. Another court document states the US Justice Department officials anticipate that the defendant will plead guilty to the charge. Once the proceedings are over, he and his family will be free to return to Australia, which could be as soon as Wednesday evening. He spoke in court. He was sworn in. Julian Paul Assange, he said, as he spelt out Assange. He's now being asked a series of questions, including his age and qualifications. Tells the court that he studied at university but didn't graduate. Dude, you had the skills of a master hacker at 20. I'm not so sure you needed to graduate. You mean like giving weapons to the Taliban? Not saying a word. Scheduled to arrive in Canberra at 6:41 p.m. today. There were chuckles in court as he says that his satisfaction with his lawyers depends on the outcome. Judge Manglona says that Assange's charge of conspiring to unlawfully obtain and disseminate classified information carries a prison sentence of up to 10 years and a fine of $250,000. A court process is now moving rather swiftly. However, there was a moment of levity when the judge asked if Assange was satisfied with his legal representation and the advice that he'd received. It might depend on the outcome of the hearing, but I otherwise am, he said. The court hears the US lawyers are satisfied that Assange has undertaken a requirement to have WikiLeaks destroy the classified information. They asked him whether or not he had been forced to plead guilty, and he said that he had not. Inside the courtroom, he's flanked by his legal team. As for the optics in the courtroom, in terms of what you can see from the media room television screens, Assange is seated at a row of desks before the judge, wearing a suit and is sporadically popping up black-rimmed glasses as the judge walks him through written paragraphs of the plea deal. Do you understand that entering a plea this morning, you accept that the guilty plea, there will be no trial of any kind, and you will be giving up all those rights to a trial that I've described to you? He says, yes. Assange says that the First Amendment and the Espionage Act are in contradiction. The judge asked Assange to explain to her what you did that constitutes that constitutes the crime charged. We then hear the longest comment from Assange so far during the court process. Working as a journalist, I encouraged my source to provide information that was said to be classified in order to publish that information. I believe the First Amendment protected that activity, but I accept that it was a violation of the Espionage statute. Asked to explain further, he said, I believe the First Amendment and the Espionage Act are in contradiction with each other, but I accept that it was difficult to win such a case given all the circumstances. A lawyer for the US government then runs through the agreed facts of the case, including the involvement of Chelsea Manning and setting up the WikiLeaks website. US government lawyer Matthew McKenzie has taken a while to read through the facts, laying out the publication by Assange via WikiLeaks of 75,000 Afghan war reports, 400,000 Iraq war reports, Guantanamo detainee reports, and 100,000 US state cables, some of them classified to the secret level. McKenzie adds that some of the raw classified documents were publicly disclosed without removing or redacting all the personally identifiable information of individuals who shared sensitive information about their own governments. He quotes Assange in saying in 2010 that it was regrettable that people exposed through his website may face some threat as a result. They're tracking whatever plane that Assange is thought to be inside. Oh, don't worry, I've got the tracker up. It hasn't taken off yet. Let's get him nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize. Well, he already won a Peace Prize here in Australia from one of our agencies, but yeah. Nobel isn't worth anything anymore, handed out to, like, favourite lists. Maybe. It would piss off Obama. Fair. Mackenzie finishes by saying the US government does not accept his view that what he was doing is protected by the First Amendment. We reject those contentions, although accept that he believes them. Guilty plea is therefore accepted. Assange found guilty. The judge now asked Assange to rise to his feet as she read the charge against him. How do you plead guilty or not guilty? Guilty to the information, he says. She confirmed it's finding the court that he's fully competent and capable of entering the guilty plea and is aware of the consequences of his guilty plea. It is therefore accepted. The defendant is now judged guilty of the offence and the court has taken a 20-minute recess. So, court shall return in about 10 minutes. Freedom of the press, in your opinion? More importantly, I genuinely believe the information that was released was in the public interest. So, there's more than just the journalistic and First Amendment issues here. And, I mean, you can't really blame Australians for coming out in force and supporting him. Because look at it this way. And what I'm about to say may piss off some of you guys from the US, but you're just going to have to forgive me and move on. Imagine, if you will, that a US citizen had gone to another country, obtained documents from that country's government, and exposed what was widely condemned as wrongdoing by that government. As a result, that government then charged the US citizen and threatened them with the death penalty. Can you honestly say that people from the US would not be up in arms over that? It's at this point, it's why exactly do individuals believe that this should not be applied? I mean, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Doesn't piss me off at all. Their treatment of him has been shameful. I'm good. So I'm going to start with Andrew Wilkie's motion. So this was held in Parliament here in Australia.
And give the call to the member for Clark.
Thank you, Speaker. That I move that this House A notes that on 20 and 21 February 2024, the High Court of Justice in the United Kingdom will hold a hearing into whether Walkley Award-winning Australian journalist Mr Julian Assange can appeal against his extradition to the United States of America. 2. Mr Assange remains incarcerated in His Majesty's Prison Belmarsh in the UK, awaiting a decision on whether he can be extradited to the USA to face charges for material published in 2010 which revealed shocking evidence of misconduct by the USA. And 3, both the Australian Government and opposition have publicly stated that this matter has gone on for too long, and B, underlines the importance of the UK and USA bringing the matter to a close so that Mr Assange can return home to his family in Australia. Speaker, sadly, we've just about run out of time to save Julian Assange, because Tuesday and Wednesday, just next week, the High Court of Justice in London is hearing Julian Assange's request for leave to appeal his US extradition in what could well be Julian Assange's last 2 days before a British court. If Mr Assange is unsuccessful next week in the UK High Court of Justice, the frightful reality is that he could be on a plane to the United States of America within hours. Within hours. Good God, Deputy Speaker, this man has already been in Belmarsh High Security Prison in London for about 5 years. The prison for the worst of the worst in the UK, where they put mass murderers and terrorists. The prison where, when I visited Julian Assange in 2000, a prisoner was knifed and killed that very afternoon elsewhere in the prison. And of course, the 5 years in Belmarsh follows some 7 years holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy. Surely this man has suffered enough and the matter must be brought to an end. But if he is unsuccessful next week in the London court, he could be on a plane within hours to another court, this time in the United States of America, where he will be facing 17 charges under the US Espionage Act and 1 charge under the US Computer Abuse and Fraud Act. If he is convicted, Deputy Speaker, he will be facing 175 years in prison in the United States. In other words, if he is extradited, perhaps as soon as next week, he will be more or less handed a death sentence. And why, Deputy Speaker? Why? Because this Walkley Award-winning journalist did his job. It's as simple as that. He did his job. And let's not forget that in 2010, Julian Assange, through WikiLeaks, revealed hard evidence of US war crimes and other misconduct in Iraq, in Afghanistan and at Guantanamo Bay. Who can forget, who could possibly forget, the grainy image provided to WikiLeaks by a brave whistleblower that subsequently was released under the title of Collateral Murder, the footage of a US attack helicopter gunning down and killing innocent civilians and Reuters journalists in a street in Iraq. We only know of that, Deputy Speaker, because Julian Assange made us aware of that. He was doing his job. He was exercising every right he has as a journalist to tell us about wrongdoing. Deputy Speaker, the injustice of all this is absolutely breathtaking. Absolutely breathtaking. As much as the attack on journalism is terrifying. Because if this matter runs to its shameful conclusion, then it will have set a precedent that applies to all Australian journalists. That if ever any Australian journalist annoys a foreign government in any way, and if that government is a government that the Australian government is hoping to curry favour with, then who's to say that the Australian government won't be complicit in the extradition or the transport of that Australian journalist to that country? What happens if an Australian journalist offends China at a time we're seeking to improve our relationship with China? The precedent will have been set that that journalist may well find him or herself on a plane to China. What about if we're trying to curry favour with Saudi Arabia and an Australian journalist writes something that offends Saudi Arabia? Will the Australian government come to that Australian journalist's aid? Well, the precedent will have been set, and no Australian journalist can be confident they will be safe in the future.
And basically, the Australian government will be able to just sit there and go, well, we're providing consular assistance in the background. Obama commuted the sentence of the person who actually leaked the info.
If this extradition goes ahead. And that's why we have this very, very important part of this motion, Deputy Speaker. The importance of the UK and the USA bringing the matter to a close. Finally, after 7 years in the embassy, 5 years in a high security prison, to just allow this long-suffering Australian journalist to come home, to be with his wife, to be with his children. The importance of this is so great, Deputy Speaker, that I'll be certainly jumping on a plane next Tuesday, hoping to be in London for the second day of the court hearing, because I think it's very important that a member of this parliament bears witness to what is going on in London next week, to stand with Julian's family and to offer them some comfort.
And I'll admit, that's one of the few times that I will say that spending taxpayer money was probably worth it. But again, I want to point out, this is Andrew Wilkie, an independent member for Clark, which is an electorate in, I believe, New South Wales. The government and the opposition did not have the balls to do this. This was an individual, independent of all political parties, who has made a name for himself, let's be honest, being the being a man for the people, shall we say. And it took him putting this motion before anybody would say anything. And it was pathetic.
And to communicate to Julian Assange and his family and his legal team the support, the widespread support already in this parliament. Let's not forget, there are dozens of members of this parliament who are members of the Bring Julian Assange Home parliamentary group. About a third, almost a third of this parliament signed an open letter to the US government not that long ago calling for this matter to be brought to an end. Well, Deputy Speaker, today, in this place, shortly, this will be the time for all of us to take a stand, to stand up and to take a stand, and to stand with Julian Assange, stand for the principles of justice, stand for the principles of media freedom and the rights of journalists to do their job. Deputy Speaker, I'm hopeful this motion can pass this afternoon. I'm hopeful that I can go to London next week.
And look how empty the chamber was. You got Barnaby Joyce sitting there for the opposition. There is supposed to be 150 people sitting in that area. But because this was a motion about Assange, because this was what they considered a slow day, look how sparsely populated it is. The speaker has to be there because that's his job. But this, to me, is disgusting.
And I can make it clear to the British government and through the media to the US government that the Australian Parliament stands as one and calls for this matter to be brought to an end. Because regardless of what you might think of Julian Assange, and I acknowledge in this place there's a range of views. There are people that loathe the man. There are people who worship the man. But I tell you what, no matter which end of that spectrum you are positioned, just about everyone agrees this has gone on too long, that it must be brought to an end. And I'm confident if this parliament can support this motion this afternoon, Deputy Speaker.
Forbidden Rule, they didn't. And they don't do it anymore.
It will send a very powerful political signal to the British government and to the US government that the British government should not entertain the idea of Mr Assange being extradited to the US. It sends a very powerful signal to Washington that Australia stands as one, saying that this matter has gone on long enough, that regardless of what you might think of Mr Assange, justice is not being served in this case now. And that in any case he's suffered enough. For heaven's sakes, Deputy Speaker, something like 5 years in Belmarsh, about 7 years in the Ecuadorian embassy. How much is enough? How much is enough? This is the afternoon where this parliament takes a stand and says enough is enough, and that we call on the US, we call on the UK to let him out of prison, drop the charges, let him be rejoined with his family, let him come home. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.
I thank the member for Clark. And
Now, where are we now? Because from that, I want to go to the actual... Is it that one? Oh, no, that's the thing from this morning. Where was the... Oh, shit, I think I lost it. That's annoying. Oh, well. And then we've got this from January last year. Documents show no sign Albanese government lobbied the US to bring Julian Assange home. So all the preening, all of the, yes, we worked so hard. Granted, this was January last year. But the government is hosting a media freedom roundtable, yet Freedom of Information inquiries show no evidence of entreaties to the Biden administration to free Australia's #1 victim of political and media persecution, Julian Assange. Actions speak louder than words, writes Rex Patrick. When independent MP, Member for Parliament, Monique Ryan, stood up in Parliament in late November 22 and asked Prime Minister Anthony Albanese if his government would intervene to bring Australian journalist Julian Assange home, those in the community that care about freedom of press were provided with a glimmer of hope. He answered, I, some time ago, made my point that enough is enough. It is time for the matter to be brought to a conclusion. Check the phrasing on it. It's important that the matter be brought to a conclusion. In that, I don't express any personal sympathy for some of the actions of Mr. Assange. I do say that the issue has gone on for many years now, and when you look at the issue of Mr. Assange and compare that with the people responsible for leaking the information, Bradley Manning and now Chelsea Manning, oh, that makes more sense. Didn't pay that much attention. The government will continue to act in a diplomatic way, but I can assure the member for Kooyong that I have raised this personally with representatives of the United States government. My position is clear and has been made clear to the US administration that it's time the matter be brought to a close. The Albanese government believes in a strong and independent media, and it is vital to democracy and holding governments to account. Really? Have you passed those words on to the E-Safety Commissioner? Just curious. A lot of articles on Reuters. Okay. As now clear, there's a big difference between saying and doing. A set of Freedom of Information requests has brought the government's Assange facade crumbling to the ground. In response to a Freedom of Information request to the Prime Minister for all correspondence or records of communication sent after 23 May 2022 by or on behalf of Prime Minister Albanese to United States President Joe Biden that related to Julian Paul Assange, his office came up with nothing. Made inquiries with the relevant staff who have knowledge of the matter related to your request and who have access to the relevant records. These staff members were asked to search for any documents which come within the terms of your request. No relevant documents were identified. I'm satisfied that all reasonable steps have been taken and that such documents do not exist. Where are we? The response left independent MP Monique Ryan disturbed. The US government's prosecution of an Australian journalist and publisher, Julian Assange, poses a major threat to the press freedom around the world. Unfortunately, the evidence is now available that, contrary to the statements, Prime Minister Albanese and his ministers have done little to secure Mr. Assange's freedom. None of them has written to the US counterparts to press for the espionage prosecution to be dropped. Now she's rightly called on the government to disclose exactly what they've done and what they will do to secure his release. In media statements, she referred to further requests made to Foreign Minister Penny Wong's office for Assange-related correspondence. Searches conducted by business areas considered most likely to hold documents relevant to your request found no documents matching the description, blah, blah, blah. After taking reasonable steps, I'm satisfied that such documents do not exist. Where's the thing about the policy? Or is this the different article? This might be a different article. The Albanese government's been caught out saying something but not meaning it. They just want to appear that as if they're doing something, when behind the scenes they're doing very little. Nothing is gained by continuing the prosecution. The Albanese government serve the United States better and promotes a solid position itself, impressing for the attack on Assange and the media freedom to stop. Where is... Damn it. Where did it go? That's the other timeline. That's the court document. Okay. So here, this is the court document that was filed in the US court. Sorry, the UK court to end the This is the court order that let him out of the UK. Upon an order granting conditional bail to allow the appellant to travel to the US District Court in Saipan pursuant to a plea agreement signed by the parties on June 19, 2024, and upon a plea agreement provided for a plea to one count of the indictment with the proposed sentence time served, and upon the appellant having left the jurisdiction pursuant to his bail conditions at 6:36 p.m. on 24 June, and upon it being anticipated the plea will be entered and accepted on Wednesday, 26 June, after which the United States will have undertaken to withdraw the extradition request. It's ordered that the parties must submit an agreed draft order in respect to the extradition appeal, by 4 p.m. on the 28th of June. So there's a little bit still to go. Let me go back and see whether or not they have updated. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will have more to say on the Assange case. I don't doubt it. Where are the... Oh, screw it. Let's see what you have to say for yourself.
With regard to your seamless Pacific Island issue of Mr. Assange.
I'm sorry, what did you just say? You're seemingly what?
With regard to your seamless Pacific Island issue of Mr. Assange, obviously the legal proceedings regarding Mr. Assange are underway right now in the United States. This is a welcome development, but we recognise as well that those proceedings are sensitive and should be respected. This isn't something that has happened in the last 24 hours. This is something that has been considered,
take credit.
Patient, worked through in a calibrated way, which is how Australia conducts ourselves internationally. Given those proceedings are happening literally in real time, it isn't appropriate to provide further commentary. We have engaged and advocated Australia's interests using all appropriate channels to support a positive outcome. And you would now be aware of the consular assistance being provided to Mr. Assange, including the presence right now of High Commissioner Smith as well as Ambassador Rudd there as part of providing that support. I've been very clear as Labor leader and as Prime Minister that regardless of your views about Mr. Assange's activities, his case has dragged on for too long. There is nothing to be gained from his continued incarceration, and we want him brought home to Australia. That's something I said as Labor leader, it's something I've said as Prime Minister, and it's something that I will have more to say about once these legal proceedings have concluded, which I hope will be very, very soon. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm just trying to find the one where it specifically said that they had a policy of not doing anything until after he'd had jail. I had everything open and in the right order and everything, and so I'm really a little bit frustrated with myself. Oh, there it is. FOI inquiries also unearthed briefings for Attorney General Mark Dreyfus, so our highest level lawyer for the country. Actually, I'm bringing this down here so I can actually look at the screen. Revealed that a clear Australian government policy to limit direct engagement on the Assange case until after he'd been extradited to the United States, put on trial, convicted and sentenced, and exhausted all appeal rights. Only then could Assange apply under the International Treaty for Prison Transfer of Prisoners scheme to serve a sentence of imprisonment in Australia. Only then would the Attorney General formally consider that possibility. That's the position behind the government's careful words about bringing the matter to a close. At no point has the Australian government called publicly for the espionage charges to be dropped and the extradition process to be ended. Last month, the Wall Street Journal reported that the US Justice Department had been considering a proposed plea deal with Assange, dropping the espionage charges and allowing to admit to a misdemeanor concerning the mishandling of classified documents. According to the Journal, the Justice Department was exploring ways to end the long London court battle as Assange continues to fight against extradition. It isn't clear whether the move for a plea deal has come from the Justice or from Justice or Assange's legal team. In any case, his lawyers said that they'd given no indication of any change in the US position at that time. Biden may have been referring to a question of a plea deal as much as representations from the Australian Parliament. A plea deal might well be under construction, but it's clearly not done yet. Well, it is now. One thing's clear, however, Albanese hasn't followed up on the parliamentary resolution with any personal diplomatic push on the Assange case. One might have thought that Albanese would have directly engaged with President Biden or else directed new representations across the top levels of the United States administration. If that were the case, one would expect Albanese's own department to be closely engaged, working with the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Australian Embassy in Washington. Albanese is a careful, process-driven Prime Minister, so one would expect there to be PM&C briefing papers and correspondence. If absolutely nothing else, one would expect there to be a parliamentary question time brief. With such expectations, on March 7, Rex Patrick submitted a new FOI application for access to the submissions and talking points and other documents. Yesterday, that same day, the Albanese's latest comments that his government was using all diplomatic efforts at every level. They provided their response to the FOI, stating that there were no further documents to be found in the possession of the department and they did not exist. So in the interim, between two separate FOI correspondences, right up until February 2024, Albanese had officially said nothing to the United States government. Honestly, I don't remember Australia ever talking about Assange coming home before now. Has Australia spoken to him, spoken about getting him home, or just now? Every time the Australian government has said that they has said anything about the Assange case, Albanese has said, we're using quiet diplomacy. We're not, yanking the chains. We're not out the front lobbying. We're not doing any of that. We're using quiet diplomacy. I call Crocker shit. Because clearly what it was you're pushing for a resolution of the case, not for his freedom. There is a difference in that. So I think, where's the other? Okay. We've got a few interviews that I wanted to have a quick look at because they're in relation to his advisors and whatnot. Greg Barnes, a long-time advisor to Assange campaign, says the focus for Julian will be rehabilitation. Peter Grest. It's not the one that I wanted. Here we go.
Tell us about the US-Australia relationship. Is that a win for that relationship?
Look, I think it's certainly being framed that way, but part of the reason that we've got to this point, that we've got to this plea deal, is because Julian Assange's case was becoming a real issue for the alliance. It's been described by some official sources, I think, as an irritant, but I think it was clearly becoming more than that. I think sitting alongside AUKUS and growing questions about what that will mean for Australian sovereignty, having the pursuit of an Australian citizen for the publication of information sitting alongside that was making people increasingly uncomfortable about the alliance. And I think both governments were increasingly aware of that as well.
So what were the practical ways in which that would be problematic for that alliance?
Well, look, the US-Australia alliance is long and deep, and it is consistently described as being based on shared democratic values. Much of the pitch, I suppose, for the AUKUS deal is that this is about aligning, and this is the words of President Joe Biden, this is about aligning autocracies against democracy. So to have that message then sitting alongside the pursuit of an Australian publisher for the publication of information that embarrassed the United States, really became irreconcilable, and I think exposed some of the hypocrisy of that relationship and of the United States in particular. When it talks about its own democratic values to be doing this, that looks increasingly hypocritical. And I think, the community was increasingly aware of that.
And yet, in the end, it didn't drop the prosecution, it's just been watered down.
That's right. And I think that's really important to note. This is so critical, as we've been hearing, for Julian Assange himself, given the extraordinary treatment that he's been subject to. But it's also true that he is, as part of this deal, is pleading guilty to a charge under the Espionage Act. And there are real concerns amongst press freedom advocates that will have a chilling effect on journalism globally. And so I think in that sense, the Department of Justice has at least got part of what it wanted in that chilling effect. And I think it will be really important to continue to watch how that plays out in the future.
This really showed the personal effects in these relationships. Things did shift under Anthony Albanese, didn't they?
Look, I think they really did. And it is, as many people have been saying, a credit to the Australian government and a credit to the skills of Australian diplomats that it has gotten to this point, because, it wasn't so long ago that the Trump administration actually began the concerted pursuit of Julian Assange by unsealing that indictment. And we saw a really strong ideological alignment between the Trump administration and the Morrison government in particular. So it has shifted really quickly. And again, I think it is a credit to the Australian government that they have advocated with the United States for Julian Assange's freedom, just, given the weight of the power imbalance and a general, fear, I think, in Australia, and particularly in Australian governments, of upsetting the United States.
And how important is the timing here? Of course, the United States going to an election, so to get this off the table ahead of time, because we know there are some very strong opinions there. We heard from Mike Pence, for example, posting on social media that this plea deal, Julian Assange endangered the lives of our troops in a time of war and should have been prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. So some quite raw emotions there as we head to the election in the US.
That's right. Look, I think it's important to say as well that there's no evidence for those claims. They've been really clearly refuted. So I think it's important for Australians to push back on those claims. But I think it's also really important, as you identified, that there was a need, or I suppose a drive, to resolve this before an election, because again, it was irreconcilable for the Biden administration, which is framing this election as a fight for the heart and soul of American democracy, to be pursuing a case that would deny somebody First Amendment rights to free speech. And so the need to get this out of the way, I think, was really critical. And so timing in that sense, I think, finally, after so long, has worked in Julian Assange's favour.
Sorry, that call took a little longer than I intended. The feds got him. Not so much. Oh, shit. Where's the one with... Wait, what did Marjorie Taylor Greene have to say? Hang on, what? Coalition of Julian Assange supporters in Washington seems to subscribe to the horseshoe theory of political persuasion that eventually the far left and the far right almost meet. Congressman Jim McGovern told Capitol Hill this is about freedom of the press. Shortly after, Marjorie Taylor Greene considered to be far right, friend of the Republican Party, rails against what she calls the deep state. She also said that Julian Assange was unfairly targeted for journalism. Did they come knocking for him? No, not so much. Assange's Australian legal advisor says guilty plea to single charge is less important than the outcome. I actually kind of disagree with that.
Tom, what is the feeling there in Canberra about Julian Assange's possible release?
Yeah, good morning, Gemma. Cautious optimism probably at this point with this hearing now underway. There are plenty in Canberra waiting to see what happens and not sort of counting on anything until Julian Assange arrives back on Australian soil. This is, as Steve mentioned, something that's been a real years-long effort at a diplomatic level to try and secure this kind of outcome that might be occurring today, raised at the sort of very highest levels from the Prime Minister down in meetings in the United States and in the UK as well. It has been at times, I suppose, a bit of a rare point of tension in the Australia-US relationships. Yeah, some key figures in the government try and play down any sense of tension there, but it has been publicly available to see at certain points that Australia and the United States have been at times at different positions on this. There has been just recently a real bipartisan agreement in Australia that this case has to be resolved. People in the Assange campaign say it was a bit of a key moment only a few months ago when a vote was held on the floor of Parliament House seeking an end to this case, with both the Coalition and Labor in agreement that this has gone on for too long. Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles was asked about this morning and didn't want to speculate on what sort of outcome the court might come to today. Didn't want to overreach, I suppose, into what the US courts are up to, but it did reiterate that point that this...
Wait until you hear the speaking points from Richard Marles, because all he does is continue to reiterate the pre-written statement, shall we say, about how it's less important exactly what the US is doing. It's more important that we don't piss anybody off. And this guy is effectively our VP. He's a deputy PM. And I just wanted to smack him up the side of the head.
Case has now been going for too long. Here's a bit of what he had to say.
Irrespective of what Mr Assange did many, many years ago, he served many years in prison, and this is about resolving his legal situation, which is appropriate. And it is appropriate that one holds that view irrespective of one's view on what Mr Assange did originally. But you know, clearly his situation needs to be resolved in one form or another, and we have been giving advocacy in that respect, and we are pleased that we are seeing this matter move now.
Steve mentioned earlier that cross-parliamentary delegation that travelled to Washington, DC last year to raise this case, and that really illustrated the strange political bedfellows that Julian Assange's case has brought together.
No. You don't get to say cross-parliamentary. It was mostly independents, and I think there was one person from the coalition. So I don't actually recall whether or not there was anyone from the government that was actually involved in that. So don't go calling it cross-parliamentary until you prove to me that the government was actually involved in it.
People from the sort of far right, the right fringes of politics, I suppose. Liberal Senator Alex Antic and Barnaby Joyce, the Nationals MP and former Deputy Prime Minister.
Our Conservative Party people attended.
Travelling with the Greens MP David Shoebridge and Independent Monique Ryan as well to take this case.
Literally, the hippie party, an independent, and two members of the coalition, which is our right-leaning party, effectively, because it's two parties. It's the Nationals and the Liberal Party that are joined together. When we call it the coalition, it's, you know, the right-leaning parties. Don't think the government wants him home. I think that the government still considers him to be radioactive, with good reason, but they're all going to be speaking out for him once he sets foot on Australian soil. Yeah.
To the halls of power in the US and meeting with people on both.
Ironically, if I'd had more than 24 hours notice, I probably would have flown to Canberra just to, you know, report on this properly. But what a forehead. Yeah. You actually have a right-leaning party. And I say right-leaning because Labor, which is our left-wing party, is very left-wing. It's literally that case where if you put the line in the middle, it's been dragged that far to the left that even someone that's considered fairly right-leaning is being drawn towards the centre. And I wouldn't even say that the Conservative Party is that conservative at this point. They just don't want things that are batshit crazy. I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think Dutton is much better. I think that we could probably use an entirely new political setup, frankly. I think that political parties should be abolished altogether. I think that individuals should represent their constituents, as in represent their individual constituents in their area, in their electorate, not a party policy. Government's probably wondering if he has a few thumb drives hidden anywhere with their names on them. Well, see, here's the thing. They're still reeling from the fact that he gave them a black eye too. The documents that were released didn't just relate to the US. Some of it pissed off some of the politicians here in Australia. And I think part of the reason why he's coming home is that some of those politicians have retired since. But if he decided to release certain documents or whatever else, I wouldn't be shocked, frankly.
Fringes of American politics too. Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Republican, and Ilhan Omar, the Democrat, who couldn't be more politically opposed, I suppose, but did come together on this particular issue. Barnaby Joyce has been quite welcoming of these developments of late, says this has been a years-long campaign coming to fruition, acknowledging, though, that also that not everyone agrees on Mr Assange's actions with WikiLeaks all those years ago. Here's a bit of what he had to say.
It has been a long road. Now, my point, and I've tried to be consistent with this all the way along, I'm not here to say whether Mr Assange and what he did was WikiLeaks was right or wrong. I have my...
That has been the political line coming at every one of the politicians' mouths for the last 6 hours. I'm not here to say whether or not what he did was right or wrong. I'm not condoning or condemning, irrespective of what I said in the past.
Own views on that, and it's not about a personal recommendation for Mr Assange's character. I'll leave that to others. What it is on the issue of extraterritoriality.
Tom, some are warning against too much praise for Mr Assange.
Yeah, this has been interesting. This is a bipartisan position. The Coalition and Labor both agree that it is time now for Julian Assange to be released. But there are differing views within Parliament House here about how he should be received, I suppose, when he comes home. There are some keen to point out that they welcome his prosecution, that he should be convicted of an offence for his actions with WikiLeaks, and warning against, I suppose, a hero's reception when he does return to Australia. Here's the Liberal frontbencher Jane Humes speaking on that earlier today.
Personally speaking, Julian Assange is no hero of mine. He put lives in danger, not just of counterintelligence agents in the US, but also of innocent and helpful Iraqi and Afghani citizens.
Then that should not have been the case. Revealing the information of crimes committed during a time of war should not have enabled individuals to be put into jeopardy. I mean, are you freaking kidding me? He was doing, like, I fully admit that I do not consider what I do to be journalism. I'm here for entertainment purposes. I really am. What he did was providing information to the public that they had a right to know. If that information put individuals into danger, I don't consider that was his responsibility. I consider that to be the problem of the individuals of whom the information pertained.
Who were helping coalition forces. That was a reckless move. Has he paid the price? Are we glad to see that this is over? Perhaps that is so, but and we're very pleased to see him return to Australia, but I don't think that hero worship is an appropriate response.
Gemma, should Julian Assange be released after this court hearing? We don't know exactly what his movements will be. We do expect him to return to Australia. There are some suggestions he could be bound for Canberra, in which case it would be interesting to see how and who, I suppose, meets and greets him upon his arrival.
Okay, so there was that. I'm just double checking whether or not there's been any specific updates, because the court was supposed to be back after 20 minutes, and so I was sort of just trying to fill in a little bit of time, but it doesn't look like they have... Oh, hang on. Refresher 2 updates. What do we got? Okay, that's funny. this chick's in Timboon, which is 20 minutes away from my regional office, which means for some reason she's able to work out in the middle of the outback as... Oh, that's hilarious. Got an interview with Assange's friend. Former CIA chief of staff insists that the plea is not unusual.
Larry, can I get your reaction to this plea deal that's taking place?
So as a career United States intelligence professional, my preference would have been for Assange to have faced a judge and jury in America and perhaps served time, depending upon the verdict, in America. But that being said, this plea agreement is fair, it's just, it's not unusual in these sorts of cases to have a plea agreement before you get to trial for a variety of reasons. One could be an effort to protect sources and methods that may be disclosed in the course of a trial. I think in this particular case, you had the diplomatic irritants with the UK and with Australia, and you had the broader question about freedom of the press and whether Assange is or is not a journalist, and that big, long debate that could have complicated matters. So in the end, I'm happy. You know, the man, I think, personally, I believe, served more time in his self-imposed exile at the Ecuadorian embassy and his time in UK prisons fighting extradition than he probably would have served if he had actually just come over to America, faced the judge and jury, and been convicted.
Are you fucking kidding me? 100+ years, and you're saying that he would have spent less time fighting it in the US. Not bad. I've gotten through an hour and a half and only had 2 of those. There's no debate, jackass. There's no authority to declare who is and is not a journalist. That's the entire point of the First Amendment. That was the thing from Albanese 35 minutes ago. Okay. So look, it doesn't look like there's been any specific update. That was the interview from 2 hours ago. I'm going to be on with Danny Arn talking about this tomorrow. Tomorrow my time, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard your time for the US. But why would he want to be convicted? Well, I mean, look, pleading guilty to the plea deal and being a convicted felon, at least it allows him to return home and be a free man to walk around, basically. And I think it allows him to move on with his life. I mean, being inside Belmarsh prison, it's got to wear you down eventually. Which I think was probably the whole point, frankly. But, where are we? Yeah, so that's that. Court's now on break. If there's any major update, I'll probably go live again and just to discuss that and bring that up. But in the meantime, the main thing is that there is a plea deal. Oh, hang on, I didn't go through the documents. Because I'm a moron. Where are we? Attaching the electronically signed felony information with the above captioned matter. Respectfully request that as soon as possible the clerk docket this letter and information to provide public notice of Rule 11. Hearing scheduled before Your Honour in Saipan for Wednesday. Appreciate the court accommodating the plea and sentencing hearing in a single day at the joint request of the parties in light of the defendant's opposition to travelling to continental United States to enter his plea and the proximity of the federal US District Court to the defendant's country's citizenship, Australia, to which we will expect he will be returning at the conclusion of the proceedings. That's the summons that was issued on him. Copy of the summons was delivered by email. Oh, and this was the order prohibiting media access. Got to take a wiki leak, go for it. Federal rules of criminal procedure prohibit the taking of photographs in the courtroom during judicial proceedings or the broadcasting of judicial proceedings from the courtroom. Therefore, there will be no public audio or video streaming of any court proceedings in this case. Cameras, video equipment, photos and recordings, audio and video are prohibited within the courthouse unless authorised by a judicial officer. After the conclusion of all proceedings in the courtroom, the jury assembly room located on the first floor will be made available as a press room for logistical support services to all news organisations and to allow any press conference by either party. In accordance with my authority pursuant to the Rules 83.2, members of the media may enter the courthouse with cameras and or audiovisual equipment for use only at the post-hearing press conference. So there's supposed to be a press conference. But the trouble is, I don't know when the press conference is going to be.
Help export the mine's iron ore.
Yeah, okay, that's got nothing to do with Assange, so... His friend says he needs time to heal. Blah, blah, blah. His new website will be WikiDump. So we get to see what the government wants us to see. Yes, unfortunately, Guy fan. But look, like I said, I'll keep an eye out for the press conference. When it comes up, I'll go live. But in the meantime, peeps, I'm going to get out of here so I can do some work and stuff. As always, please remember you're not a piece of shit. You have value and you do contribute to society. YouTube's continuing to purge. I'm now under the 700 mark. So if you wouldn't mind just double checking if you're still subscribed, that'd be great. But as always, stay healthy, wealthy, wise, and I'll catch you all shortly. Anyway. Oh, and congratulations, Julian. It's nice to see that you're going to be a free man. And hopefully one day I'll be able to interview you myself.
I'm out. Fuck this shit, I'm out. No thanks. Don't mind me. I'ma just grab my stuff and leave. Excuse me, please. Fuck this shit, I'm out. Nope. Fuck this shit, I'm out. Alright then. I don't know what the fuck just happened, but I don't really care. I'ma get the fuck up out of here. Fuck this shit, I'm out.